Will you ever run out of ideas? That's a good question, John. And I've certainly had the suggestion in the comments at times that I must be running out of ideas when there were weeks when I just didn't have the time to make a very elaborate video, because people seem to really disproportionately emphasize the idea, and lack of time is confused for lack of idea. Of course, starting with a really good idea in a project is really important. If you start with a lousy idea, putting a lot of time into implementation is kind of a waste of time. And then I get the emails from time to time, I have this incredible idea for a new woodworking tool or whatever. It's so valuable, first you have to sign a non-disclosure agreement so that you don't share my ideas or run with it on your own. And so that sort of thing, I'm always, your idea is best kept safe with you. I'd rather not hear it. Because what if it actually is a good idea and I have the same idea? Then you're the one who's going to claim ownership to that idea, right? And chances are it's not really a good idea. Then I get this, I've got this cool idea, but I don't have the skills to implement it, and again, can we work together? And my response to that is, well, if I'm going to put in a lot of time implementing something, I think it would be much more fun if it was based on my own idea. Then I wouldn't have to work with anybody and I wouldn't have to share credit or anything. Just so much more fun. And I'm not lacking in ideas. I have way more ideas than I have time to build. And implementing an idea involves a lot of steps, and each step is a problem, and that requires ideas to solve. So the actual act of building a project, you start with the main idea, but then you have hundreds of little ideas every time you put something together. How are you going to do this? How does this join that? And so to implement a project, you don't just need the big idea, you need lots of little ideas. And if you're lacking the skills to build a project, that's to say you lack the skills for all the little ideas. And if you can't figure out the little ideas, maybe you're not the best person to come up with a big idea too, because those are kind of related. And if you do have the skills for all the little ideas, it could be that you realize that that big idea is actually rather flawed, and perhaps your big idea is so original because people who have the skills to build this idea realize that actually it isn't a good idea, and so nobody's built it. Architecture is a lot like that. They emphasize originality a lot, and unfortunately for them, most practical things have already been built, so they tend to really focus on impractical things because originality is more important. But will I run out of ideas? Well, a good idea for an invention, you got to start with a problem, and you got to start with a problem that's significant enough and that's solvable enough. Essentially, you go for the low-hanging fruits of problems that are common enough with solutions that are simple enough. And once those have been solved, then you're kind of left with problems that very few people encounter, or problems that are just way too difficult to solve. And so you do in some ways run out of problems that way, because again, you go for the low-hanging fruit first, and once those are gone, it becomes much harder. Then of course, I make projects on ideas that are completely useless but novel, like a Jenga pistol or a slinky escalator or a domino row building machine. And the key to those is it has to be something recognizable enough for people, it has to be novel, but it also has to be simple to solve. If it's going to take me several weeks just to build something novel, it's not very motivating for me, because I know I have no actual use for the end result, and unless I'm guaranteed that the thing is going to go viral, it's like, why bother? Because I'm not somebody who gets 1 million views for every video. There's no guarantee that the video will succeed. And then there's ideas for furniture projects, and one of my principles on that is it has to be useful to me, because I don't want to build stuff that then I don't know what to do with, which limits the ideas for some of that stuff as well. I've seen on Homemade Modern where he's using a piece of plywood that he mentioned was from a previous experiment, and I looked at that plywood thinking, that looks about the shape of that, and looked at the grain pattern, and then looked at previous videos, and it's like, sure enough, he tore apart an old project. So I always wondered what happened with some of those projects, and I just don't want to get to the point where I build stuff that then I don't know how to get rid of and actually end up tearing apart because I didn't actually need it in the first place. Except for really novel stuff, I like to build stuff that is at least useful to me, because then if all else fails, at least I've got something useful. And if it is useful to me, then I'm also a very good judge of whether this is actually done well. I get lots of suggestions of, oh, you should build this or that, and I'm like, I'm unfamiliar with this problem, and sure, I could try to solve it, but if it's not something I use, how do I know if it's any good? I try to, for the most part, except for really simple novelty projects, I try to stick with stuff that is practical and useful, because on YouTube, on the internet at this point, I think there's far too much chasing of novelty already, and I don't really want to make that any worse. I'll leave the useless total novelty stuff to other people, unless it's something that is simple enough and I'm pretty sure it'll go viral, like a Jenga pistol.